Good day, everyone, and welcome to the PCPAN press conference to urge state attorney generals to block the Express Script Medco merger. Today's conference is being recorded. At this time, for opening remarks and introductions, I'd like to turn things over to Elizabeth Heaton. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Miranda, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. As Miranda said, my name is Elizabeth, and I'm the media contact for the Preserve Community Pharmacy Access Now Coalition. We're very excited to have this opportunity to talk today about the proposed ESI Medco merger and the call to action that we're issuing to state attorneys general to oppose it. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of our program today, but before we get started, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the agenda for today's call. We have three great speakers lined up from groups that are independent but in agreement regarding their opposition to this merger. Our first will be David Balto. David is a public interest attorney in Washington, D.C. and former FTC policy director. David's going to give us some background on the merger and why it's important for state attorneys general to weigh in. Following the overview from David, we'll hear from Steve Pociask, president of the American Consumer Institute. And finally, we'll hear from Dan Gustafson, who is an advisory board member at the American Antitrust Institute. After our participants have had a few minutes to talk, we will open up the question and answer portion of our call. At that time, I'll ask the operator to provide instructions to those of you that would like to ask a question of our guests. And before we get started, I did want to remind you all that more information on the ESI Medco merger and our efforts to stop it can be found on the PCPAN website. And that web address is www.preservingcommunitypharmacy.com. With that, I'll turn things over to David to get us started. David?
Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody on the phone. One of the landmark achievements of the Obama administration antitrust program has been to revitalize antitrust enforcement in the healthcare area. The Department of Justice has done a great job of going and looking at health insurance mergers and bringing cases against anti-competitive practice and anti-competitive mergers in the health insurance area, an area because of the lack of enforcement during the Bush administration basically gave health insurers an antitrust exemption. Now is the time for the Federal Trade Commission to do the same and the states to step up to the plate and block this merger. I've been a public antitrust enforcer for 18 years, and I litigated a lot of cases, including Staples Office Depot and drug wholesalers on behalf of the FTC. But there are few mergers that I've ever seen that are as anti-competitive as this merger. And by the way, my message today isn't just to the state attorneys general, but it's also to the FTC, which hasn't made any decision yet, and people shouldn't jump the gun on that. I wanted to focus on one important point, why consumers should care about this merger. PBMs sound obscure, but they have a tremendous impact on every consumer who needs drugs. There are four reasons why consumers will be harmed by this merger. And as you know, I testified on behalf of a coalition of consumer groups that oppose the merger before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I also represent employers and health plans who oppose the merger. Here are the four reasons. First, they'll lose access to their community pharmacy. When the healthcare debate was going on, everybody was tremendously concerned that people would lose access to the doctor, and the first principle everybody responded with was, don't worry, you still can use your same doctor. Well, the same concern applies when it comes to pharmacy, even more so, because community pharmacists are oftentimes the most accessible healthcare professional we have, especially in underserved urban and rural areas. Community pharmacists also do a great job of providing health care counseling, everyday health care counseling that saves you the visit to the hospital and the doctor. Community pharmacists pay a particularly important job for the 57 million Americans who need specialty drugs. Those are people with vulnerable conditions like hepatitis, infertility, and cancer. Those are people who spend a tremendous amount of money on really expensive drugs. That's reason one. Reason two is that through the merger, Express Scripts will be able to force consumers into mail order and away from their community pharmacy. Now, they love to call this home delivery, but it ain't the milkman coming to visit you. These are consumers who want to use their community pharmacy, but are instead told that they have to use mail order. Mail order is oftentimes more costly. There's less generic substitution. That is, people use generics less because the because oftentimes the PBMs, which own their own mail order operation, are getting rebates from the branded manufacturers to force generics on to consumers. Again, forcing people into mail order will harm consumers. The third reason involves the $4 generic programs that are very popular at major supermarket chains. Well over 1 million consumers throughout the United States use these $4 generic programs, and folks, these are the low-price competitor in the market. Given a choice between pulling out your PBM card and paying a $10 copay or paying the supermarket pharmacy $4, you don't need a PhD in economics to figure out which is the better deal. This merger will allow Express Scripts to significantly reduce reimbursement to these pharmacies. These supermarket pharmacies, they're not going to be in the same position of being able to provide the $4 generic programs. And we estimate the increased cost to consumers because of the diminution of the $4 generic programs to cost consumers over $200 million a year. Over $200 million a year. Finally, consumers who need vital specialty drugs, these are the drugs that cost like $1,800 a prescription, that are really hard to take, in which costs are increasing especially, those consumers are going to have to pay more. Because Express Scripts is going to use that market clout they're going to get by having 150 million covered lives and force manufacturers to give it exclusive arrangements. And we know from Express Scripts' past record, when they get exclusivity, they go and significantly ratchet up prices. We know that. That's the reason why we're always concerned about any other kind of exclusivity. And that's why everybody needs to be concerned. After the merger, Express Scripts is going to use that market power to go and significantly increase the price of drugs. And that's also going to diminish the ability of other PBMs to effectively compete with it because it won't have access to those vital specialty drugs. Now, fundamentally, if the FTC and the states don't go to bat and block this merger, they're taking a gamble. And this is a gamble they should not take. They're taking a gamble on behalf of consumers that somehow consumers will benefit from this merger. And if you look at the cards, you don't need to be a wizard from Las Vegas to figure out consumers are going to lose that bet for 3 reasons. First, over the past several years, we've seen the profits of the 3 major PBMs, Express Scripts, Medco, and Caremark, skyrocket from over $900 million a year to over $6 billion a year, a 600% increase. Now, the total drug spending increased by 600%. How did they have those profits increase so much? They got it because they had increased market power from mergers and other acquisitions. They got those increasing profits because of the lack of transparency in the market. They got those increasing profits by playing the spread, by saying drugs were one price, but getting a rebate, but not passing the rebate on. Second, these merging firms are serial violators of the consumer protection laws. There are very few markets where we've seen people been found violating consumer protection laws, engaging in deceptive and egregious practices, and having to pay the piper as much as the PBM industry. Each of the 3 PBMs have been found guilty in cases brought by state attorneys general, which have secured over $370 million of penalties and fines. What were the PBMs doing? They were going and switching consumers to more high-priced drugs, less safe drugs. Let me repeat that. More high-priced drugs and less safe drugs because they were getting higher rebates from manufacturers. Now, the PBMs will tell you that they've cleaned up their act, but we only have to look from the news this week about Medco having to pay a $2.8 million fine for activity they engaged in effectively bribing CalPERS over CalPERS conduct. Finally, this is a bet that the states and the FTC shouldn't take because there's no evidence that consumers have benefited from past mergers. There have been lots of past mergers. It would be easy, simple for the PBMs to go and document that those mergers led to lower prices, but they can't and they don't because there is simply no evidence of that. What the evidence clearly shows is that they've lined their pocketbooks because the PBMs put profits ahead of patients, and that's why the states and the FTC should come to bat and block this merger. Well, let me turn things over to Steve Pociask, and get the view of the American Consumer Institute.
Well, thank you. Yeah, this is Steve. I'm the president of the American Consumer Institute. The PBM market, in a nutshell, is a dysfunctional market. It's one that a merger will not fix, will only make worse for consumers. PBMs are theoretically designed to benefit its members and employees who buy prescription drugs, but that by that description, I mean one would think that PBMs serve to benefit consumers, but in reality, it's not clear sometimes who PBMs represent. In competitive markets in general, we assume that there's this perfect information about costs and prices. And as David was just mentioning about the problem with transparency in the industry, the reality is that PBMs have all the information about cost and price at various stages, from manufacturer to wholesale to retail, while the pharmacies and members have incomplete information. It's this sort of asymmetric information that benefits PBMs at everyone else's disadvantage. It disadvantages others in negotiation, and in the end, it represents a market failure. In this case, it's a conflict of interest as well, sometimes referred to as sort of the principal agent problem. Just going back to the old, my old studies of economics, Adam Smith in The Wealth of the Nation wrote about how greed of the storekeeper leads to the benefits of consumers in the sense that consumers are best served, like when the butcher seeks to minimize costs and maximize sales. Ironically, the PBM market is dysfunctional in that its quest for profits do not necessarily maximize consumer benefits. Let me give you an example. PBMs can increase their profits by changing the formulary to garner a kickback from a drug manufacturer, where a new formulary is not necessarily the lowest cost to the consumer. So PBMs can maximize their profits without doing what is best for the interests of consumers. This is completely contrary to competitive market. Similarly, the high rates of profits that David just referred to in the industry would normally encourage more competitors to enter the market and to bid away the higher returns. That's a well-accepted microeconomic tenet. Yet, it doesn't work for the PBM market. With high and rising profits, the industry continues to concentrate, which suggests the presence of market power. Consumers are the losers here. So what we have here, again, is a dysfunctional market. The lack of transparency in costs and prices in the market benefits PBMs who can profit at each point, reducing plan costs, squeezing margins, reducing the pharmacy's reimbursement for filling a prescription, getting manufacturer kickbacks in return for changing the formulary, and so on. Imagine a pharmacy working with only a couple of PBMs in a market for community. In an example, the pharmacy's access to the market would be highly restricted since it could only work through one or two PBMs to serve its customers. Now, if the Express Scripts and Medco merger were to take place, a pharmacy could only see its ability to reach its customers between, one or two PBMs. So in this way, the PBMs become essentially a price maker, and the pharmacy is a price taker, which means that pharmacies must either comply with the PBM's demands or exit the market. In other words, the merger can facilitate sort of legal collusion in a way by consolidating a few channels that aggregate the majority of consumers in a community, thereby curtailing the pharmacy's access to the market. Moreover, even if the pharmacy conceded its discounts, there's no market pressure for the PBMs to flow the savings through to consumers. So how convenient. So the pharmacies disappear and PBMs can take consumers from an open competitive channel, the community pharmacies essentially, to a closed mail order type service. So what I'm saying is PBMs essentially can engage in self-dealing. These pharmacies are where consumers go for their services, the prescriptions, quick help to get advice in their neighborhood. Consumers want these pharmacies. So in summary, what we have here is like an agency, a principal agent problem. We have market failure that's caused by asymmetric information and the lack of transparency. We have conflicts at various stages, both vertically and horizontally. We have collusive pricing of the group plans. We have excess profiting on the spread. We have self-dealing. And We have manufacturer kickbacks in return for favorable formulary placement. The profitability of the industry confirms the market power that David was referring to, and it provides evidence that the total social welfare of consumers is being adversely affected, and it is, in fact, a dysfunctional market. That's what we have today. Now, the merger will only increase these problems. It will increase profits. It will drive out consumer access to pharmacies. It'll force consumers to strictly use mail order, which will essentially capture members for higher rates in the future. Losing access to neighborhood pharmacies is a bad deal for consumers. So in closing, this merger would be a big mistake. It would harm consumers. Government actions are needed to correct these sorts of market failures, and the merger should be blocked. And I'm just going to stop right there, and let me turn it over to Dan for his remarks.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you all on the call for providing me the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Dan Gustafson, and I practice antitrust law at Gustafson Glick in Minneapolis, where it's sunny today, and we're happy that spring is here. I'm an advisory board member of the American Antitrust Institute, and I was part of an ad hoc group of the AAI that looked at the public information about this merger to give the AAI's views on the troubles that this merger poses. And let me emphasize first that timing remains critical. As you all know, the FTC has not yet made a decision, although there are press reports that suggest the decision is coming soon. And the problem with antitrust enforcement is that although it can sometimes undo the effects of already concentrated markets or anti-competitive conduct, preventing such conduct before it occurs is far more effective antitrust and public policy. The AAI has several concerns about this proposed merger, which we have already raised with the FTC when we urged it to seek to block this merger. We hope that the state's attorneys general will make their concerns known to the FTC as well, and if the FTC does not act, that the state attorneys general will use their own antitrust laws to stop or modify this merger. The market for national PBM services is already concentrated as the result of past mergers in this market space. CVS, Caremark, Express Scripts, and Medco, the big three PBMs, already control a majority of the market when measured in terms of prescriptions, and almost 80% of the market when measured in terms of large plan-sponsored contracts. A merged Express Scripts Medco company will dominate this market, covering over 150 million prescription drug consumers and more than 50% of large plan sponsors. As the result of our evaluation of the public information about this merger, the AAI has several concerns, which we hope the FTC, and if not the FTC, the state attorneys generals will address. First, that the merger will reduce competition for the provision of PBM services to large plan sponsors. Although there are clearly smaller PBMs in this market space, most of those entities operate in a regional area only, serve a special niche market only, or offer a limited menu of services in areas such as specialty drugs, mail order, or claims processing. Some of these smaller PBMs also lack the ability to negotiate discounts and rebates from drug manufacturers. As a result, these regional PBMs cannot compete against national full-service PBMs for the business of large plan sponsors. Secondly, and I think this is probably one of the primary issues that causes the AAI concern, the proposed merger here will lead to increased prices and reduced services in the specialty pharmacy markets. Significant concerns exist in this market for the distribution of specialty drugs, where Express Scripts and Medco will own the two largest specialty pharmacy businesses, containing more than 50% of that market segment. Reduced competition in this market segment will lead to increased costs and reduced services to the consumers and patients who depend on these treatments the most. Third, the proposed merger will increase the exercise of buyer power to reduce the delivery of traditional pharmacy services. This is something David talked about earlier, but we're concerned that at the AAI that the major PBMs already possess the ability and the incentive to exercise market power over retail, independent, and chain pharmacies. Reimbursements from the PBMs are a major source of their revenue, and the proposed merger would enable the two remaining PBMs large PBMs to push compensation to the retail pharmacies below competitive levels, thereby eliminating jobs and leading to reduced important services for their consumers. Finally, as has been mentioned already, we have reason to be skeptical of the efficiencies that Express Scripts and Medco claim they will achieve by this merger. They have not demonstrated these efficiencies in the past, and they haven't demonstrated that they can produce these efficiencies as the result of this merger. Rather, it appears the only efficiencies that can be gained by this merger are the layoff of people who are duplicative in the administration of these two pharmacies. Even if they could demonstrate efficiencies as the result of the merger, these efficiencies would be significant only if the proposed savings would be specific to this merger and could not otherwise be obtained by means unrelated to the merger. As has been widely discussed today and in the past, the profits of these large PBMs have spiked continually over the last few years, which suggests less and not more competition, and as a result, higher prices for plans and for consumers. Thank you.
David, Steve, and Dan, thanks very much for detailing the reasons that this merger needs to be stopped and why we're calling on the FTC and state attorneys general today. At this time, I want to ask our operator to provide instructions for asking questions of our guests.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1 on your touch-tone phone. If you're using a speakerphone, please make sure that your mute function is turned off to allow your signal to reach our equipment. Again, *1 for any questions or comments. And we'll pause for just one moment. Again, ladies and gentlemen, *1 for any questions or comments.
Could I just make a comment? This is David.
Go ahead, David.
Yes, there are people, I think, who, might, when people prognosticate, those people predicted Michigan to win the Final Four. They sort of think the FTC is not likely to come to bat. I suggest they all sit down and, have a stiff drink and read the Commission's opinion in a hospital merger decision that they issued today, the ProMedica case, in which it goes into great detail about how a duopoly is anti-competitive and reducing the number of competitors from 3 to 2, harms competition. And we think, looking at cases like this and the baby food case, the drug wholesalers case, and Staples Office Depot, there's clear precedent here for challenging the merger.
And we do have a phone question from Jim Doyle with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch.
Yes, thank you. Which companies or associations are the major sponsors or financial sponsors of your group, Community Pharmacy Access Now?
Hey, Jim, this is Elizabeth. And Preserve Community Pharmacy Access Now is a broad coalition of pharmacists, patient and consumer advocates, individuals and groups from across the country that have come together just for the purpose of opposing this merger.
And I'm just wondering whether there are particular associations, for example, the Retail Drugstore Association or the Supermarkets Association that have backed this effort.
We're certainly working with those groups on this effort, but no, they're not backing our organization. And if you would like some more information about our membership, it's available on our website, preservingcommunitypharmacy.com.
Jim, I think it's an interesting question. Another question one could ask is, how do congressmen line up about this merger? If you look at the numbers, Jim, right now the number is 78-1. 78 congressmen have written expressing concern to the FTC, and one has sort of said this merger is kosher. If you look at the history of mergers where the Congress has weighed in, there's never been one in which there's been such overwhelming opposition. Another thing you could look at, Jim, is consumer groups. And typically you get some kind of split in consumer groups, but here consumer groups speak in a single voice. And that single voice is this merger is very problematic and should be blocked. No consumer group has come out in support of this merger.
We'll take our next question from Diane Kartz with Reuters.
Hi there. So I have two questions. First one is, what remedies would make this deal acceptable, if any? And the second has to do with the track record of AGs challenging major mergers. Can you talk about what the history of that has been?
Diane, this is Dan Gustafson. I don't know what remedies would make this merger appropriate, but I have some ideas about what remedies might make this merger more palatable, and that would be to require ESI and Medco, the proposed combined company, to divest itself of some of their specialty pharmacy operations. As I recall, ESI has a CuraScript specialty pharmacy and Medco has a Credo, and taking down their market share, post-merger market share in those specialty pharmacy, in that specialty pharmacy market space would go a long ways towards alleviating some of the concerns that are raised by this potential combination. The second thing would be the mail order pharmacy. As everyone knows, more and more mail order pharmacies are becoming the norm in PBM benefit packages, and this company post-merger will have a majority of the mail order. So offering or ordering them to divest in the mail order business would also go a long ways to alleviating some of the concerns about this merger.
This is David. Can I just weigh in on that just so we can deal with the issue together? Consumer groups, you're normally we're on the same page, but we're not on the same page on this one. And consumer groups believe there is no divestiture appropriate here. At the end of the day, Express Scripts, if it acquires Medco, can use those 150 million covered lives, and regardless if they have one little specialty pharmacy factory or two little specialty pharmacy factories, they're still going to be able to use that market clout. They'll be able to force manufacturers into exclusive arrangements and significantly ramp up the price of specialty drugs. They'll be able to force plans into using exclusive networks, preventing consumers from using their community pharmacy. Sometimes the agencies, the FTC, might find it appealing to settle cheap, but settling cheap here will cost consumers, a huge sum of higher prices and a huge cost in terms of less convenience and less service. So there is no consent decree that should be accepted.
Yeah, this is Steve. I agree with that. I think this needs to just be blocked. I can't see how a remedy could, we can have a half a deal out of this.
Okay, and the track record on state AGs?
Yeah, the state AGs actually have a good track record, but look, we've got to put this into context. 5 or 10 years ago, the FTC was fairly asleep as, PBMs were playing their shell game, forcing consumers into buying more expensive drugs because PBMs were getting bigger rebates. Consumers were oftentimes switched into less safe drugs. The FTC sat on its hands, and the states came up to bat, and they stopped those practices. When it comes to PBMs, the FTC can tell a fiend from a friend, and they know when entities are putting profits before patients, and they'll act accordingly. On the merger front, Diane, the states have been effective in some cases in challenging mergers. The most significant one was the California Stores case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. When the states think there's a problem, and they've already recognized there's a problem involving PBMs, they're every bit as capable, if not more capable litigator than the FTC. And, ultimately, if they bring a case, it isn't a bureaucrat in Washington who's going to make a decision whether or not this merger is anti-competitive. It's a federal court judge. That's the person who's going to be making the decision. And, I think in that setting, the states who will be there representing the consumers in their states, I think will be a very effective and persuasive advocate.
Thank you.
Thank you. And again, ladies and gentlemen, *1 for any questions at this time. And Ms. Heaton, I'll turn the conference back over to you.
Great. Thank thank you all for joining us today. If there are any questions that were not answered, you can please feel free to email me directly at elizabeth@preservingcommunitypharmacy.com, or you can give me a call at 703-901-9706. We want to thank you for your time today, and have a great day.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That does conclude today's conference call. We'd like to thank you all for your participation.